Greetings and welcome back. In this video, we will be discussing how the applications you use can affect your ability to switch to a different operating system. This is the second installment in my Switching to Linux series. For those interested, there will be a link to the previous video appearing in the upper right-hand corner at some point. At the end of this video, if you stay to the end, there will be a link to the playlist where all these videos will be located, such that they are, since this is the second one right now. But anyways, please stay to the end to find the link. It was pointed out to me that in my introductory video, I did toss out some jargon terms, which unfortunately I repeatedly told myself not to do. So much for that idea. If you do go back and watch it, I want to offer a couple of points of clarification. The term OS is an acronym for operating system. Microsoft Windows and Mac OS are examples of closed source operating systems. That is, you can't look at the source code. They are owned by a corporation. Linux is an example of an open source operating system. The difference being that if you want to, you can go in and actually look at all the Linux source code, which a lot of very smart people do, which is great for the rest of us. We will be discussing this in a future video when we talk about choosing a Linux distribution in more detail. Speaking of which, I did mention Debian, which is a Linux distribution. Probably should have just said a Linux operating system, as we will be discussing this in more detail when we talk about distributions. One thing I should mention here, Linux is just a kernel. Think of it as the heart of the operating system, or if you like, the brain of the operating system. Either way, it is just a kernel. By itself, it's not very useful to most people. A Linux distribution takes this Linux kernel and surrounds it with various tools, applications, and other things users need, want, or desire to get things done on their computer. There are so many Linux distributions because there are so many ideas about how different people want to get different things done, and so many different ways to do them. But enough of my rambling here. Let's get on to the subject at hand, applications that one needs to account for before switching operating systems. So before jumping into the application end of it, I want to reiterate our target audience here. Average computer users new to Linux who just want things to work. If you're thinking about switching to a different operating system, you need to pay close attention to the applications that you are currently using. This is arguably the most important initial step you can take. If you cannot do what you need to do, there is no point in switching operating systems, and applications are critical to that. We'll be getting into the Linux operating system later. I keep saying that. Yes, we will be. But I just want you to be aware that some will tell you Linux is not Windows and don't expect it to work like Windows, or Mac for that matter, which is true. But then again, for the casual user, one can make the Linux operating system replicate the look and feel of another operating system. And as long as one doesn't poke too far under the hood, and I suspect there are not a lot of average users who want to do that, then the differences may be irrelevant. For now, let's focus on the applications, as this can most certainly become a deal breaker. Remember also, we are looking for equivalency, not a direct replacement. Applications that offer equivalent functions. Probably one of the biggest regrets I see from many people who switch operating systems is that one of their needed functions is not available from an application, and their original application does not run on the new operating system. And while there may be alternative applications, it does not support features X, Y, and Z which they need. Once upon a time, this was unavoidable, but today there are only a small number of features and a small number of applications that are not going to be supported. Note, this does not mean that the particular feature will be implemented in a similar way. What I have found a lot of times is not that the feature was not actually available, but rather the end user did not know what application had that feature or how to access it. In this day and age, you can actually test drive some of the major open source applications regardless of the operating system you're using, because a lot of applications now work cross-platform. And in the instances where this is not the case, there are still a few ways to test applications. You can run a live version of Linux from a USB. Just be aware there will be performance issues, even with USB 3, as internal SATA and M2 drives are always much faster. You can install Linux on an old computer. Most of us who use computers on a regular basis probably have an old desktop or an old laptop laying around in a closet someplace. Go ahead and repurpose it, install Linux on it, and test drive it. Something we're going to get to here eventually is doing just that. Depending on the computer age, though, again, performance issues if it's too old or doesn't have enough memory or powerful enough CPU. But again, we'll talk about that more when we talk about the operating system specifically. You can also choose to dual boot, but I do not recommend this for beginners. It is not that there is anything difficult about dual booting operating systems. It's just that some operating systems do not play nice with others, so there's a rather specific and sometimes confusing ways or orders to do steps to get around these shortcomings. You can also read tutorials on various applications, but the benefit is limited if you do not have the application available to test them against. So the first time I actually did an operating system switch, I spent several days with a notebook in front of my computer. Every time I went to do something, I noted it down. What application I used, what function of the application, if it was really necessary, just a quick one-liner. After about a week, I went through and totaled up everything. And this told me what functionality I absolutely needed, what functionality was nice to have, and by what was not listed, the functionality I really didn't need. That one surprised me a bit and was mainly an operating system feature list. For example, under certain operating systems, one can pull a small calendar from the clock in the taskbar. Function I never used. I knew it was there, but I never used it and I didn't really need it. On the other side of the coin, you may find functions in Linux distributions you love and no longer want to be without. For example, opening the Start menu from any point on the desktop rather than having to go down to the Start menu icon in the lower part of your desktop. Feature I really like on some Windows managers. It's a really good idea for determining your usage. You can probably achieve similar results by just being more aware of what you're doing on your computer. You don't necessarily have to do what I did and write things down, although can't hurt. Like I say, a little one-liner every time you do something is not a big deal, but again, just being more aware of what you're doing with your computer can... One last note before I jump into applications I use. I am not a style phobic. What I mean by that, for example, I am a Kirkland and Dickies kind of guy when it comes to clothing. I don't need little crocodiles or penguins on my clothing. And in fact, that looks like somewhat trashy juvenile cry for attention, but I know other people do value that kind of thing. It's just not me. I'm not a style person. The point is, you will hear a lot of users complain that open source applications and operating systems do not look modern. I don't care, as I will always put functionality over form or appearance. But that is just me. You might find a particular style or look something you need. And yeah, people do sometimes need that. I'm just not one of them. So the last part of this video is me going over some of the applications I use. Just remember, these are not drop-in replacements, and it may take some time and study to figure out how to achieve specific functionality and results. And in some cases, there will be no equivalent, or it might be complicated to achieve. At that point, you need to decide how critical that specific functionality is. Look for the features you need and how to access the features. Avoid direct comparisons, as they are different programs. I am also trying to avoid online programs in this example, even though those can provide legitimate functionality that you might need, which can be an alternative to missing functionality from actual installed applications. Google Docs comes to mind, having Office functionality, but also having corporate monitoring along with it. Also want to note that some open source programs allow for scripting, which can add functionality one might need, though that might be a bit more complex than the average user is looking for. Focus is always on applications with graphical user interfaces in this video. Yes, I know the command line can achieve similar results in many cases, sometimes much faster. But the target audience here is the average user new to Linux. And this list is by no means complete or exhaustive. It's just what I use. I also note that most of the stuff on this list is going to have versions for not only Linux, but Windows and many times Mac as well. So you could actually load these straight onto your computer if you're running Windows and test them before switching over. Also, important note here, I am far from an expert content creator. What I mean by this is I do not really use the advanced techniques or functionality that might be limited to specific applications. For instance, Photoshop functionality and not available in GIMP. I just don't use it. I have not used Adobe since Creative Suite 3. I think that was around 2008, 2009. But I do not think things have changed much. There's a lot of stuff you can do in Photoshop you can't do in GIMP, but if you don't use it, it's kind of pointless to have Photoshop. Okay, let's go ahead and start with OBS Studio for Linux. It's also available for Windows. This is for all your digital recording needs. It's a cool program. It's what I use. Pretty much any screen capture, cameras, microphones, internal, external, it will record it all. It'll also allow you to stream. So very useful program for recording videos. And again, there is a Windows version available out there. I'm not sure if it originated on Windows or Linux, but again, available on all major operating systems. Let's just move this out of the way for a moment, and we can keep recording. Next up is Firefox, a web browser I'm using. Available on every major operating system. There are other web browsers you could use, Opera, Chromium, but I'm using Firefox. It's fairly user-friendly. If you want the privacy, you really need to take a look at your settings and do some adjustments there, but that's a subject for another video. Let's see, next up, let's talk Thunderbird. Yeah, let's talk Thunderbird. Email client, available on all platforms again. This is the Linux version. I haven't really set it up fully yet because I'm still using an email client on the Windows side, and I don't want to be running two email clients to the same account simultaneously. But depending on how Windows 11 goes with the next update, I may be saying goodbye to Windows. We'll see how it goes. But this is a full-featured email client and pretty much meet all your local email needs. Moving on. Office suites. I'm using LibreOffice. I'm using it on both Windows and Linux. This is the Linux version here. You have your basic word processor. Does styles, does tables, does all the normal stuff you expect a word processor to do. I've actually found this one a little easier to use than the MS Word. I found this one easier to use in a lot of cases. Actually, most cases I found this one easier to use. Other people have different opinions. It's, I guess, what you're used to. I've been using it for quite a few years now, and you can see you save all sorts of different formats, including all the major Windows formats. I will say it may be like 95% compatible, but if you get some really deep features in Word, then you're probably going to have some issues. But if it's just basic styles and stuff, yeah, no issue. At least I've not had one. And I guess we'll hit the spreadsheet next. LibreOffice Calc. This is your standard spreadsheet. Works pretty much like Excel. Can save things in Excel format. Again, enter numbers. Enter formulas. And again, I found this one in certain cases easier to use than Excel. But again, been using it for years. Okay, next. Impress. Okay, I've been using Impress for years, but honestly, for Impress, I found PowerPoint easier to use, but Impress can duplicate pretty much all the functionality. Impress can pretty much duplicate the functionality. Again, of the Office suite provided by LibreOffice, this one I found the hardest to use, and the one that I think PowerPoint's actually a little easier to use, especially with things like slides animation and stuff like that. I mean, the functionality is there. It's just, in certain cases, is significantly different. All right, next, we have a database program. This is sort of equivalent of Access, Microsoft Access. I haven't played with with the client-side databases for a long time. I'm more familiar with SQL databases like MariaDB, but this is quite similar to Access. Some other programs, we have LibreOffice Draw. This is a structured drawing program. There's not an equivalent in the Office suite for Microsoft, and again, there are other programs to use for drawing, but this comes with it. And it's good for quick stuff. And the other thing here in LibreOffice is LibreOffice Math, which lets you write math equations of various forms. This takes it's got kind of a learning curve to it, but once you get it, it's fairly easy to use, but again, learning curve. And I think that's about it for LibreOffice. Well, here's the main LibreOffice program that accesses all the other sub-programs. So whether it's a Word file or whether it's a word processor document or a spreadsheet, you can access it here. If you just need a single icon instead of the 4 like I've got down here. All right, next is the GIMP. There we are, the GIMP. This is the one people always compare to Photoshop. It's come a long way. It's still not Photoshop. You can add a lot of Photoshop functionality through filters and scripts and things. It does have a decent set of tools on its own, so depending on what you're actually doing, this might be sufficient for your usages. Like I say, it does have a fairly sophisticated set of tools. There is another program called Krita, which overlaps with GIMP in quite a few ways that you might want to try out. Krita, I think, also overlaps with Inkscape a little bit, which we're going to touch on next. All right, Inkscape's our next program we're going to look at here. This is a vector drawing or vector graphics program, and like I say, Krita has some overlap with both Inkscape and GIMP. So that's if you want to look at something. I'm not sure if Krita is available on Windows or Mac, but Inkscape and GIMP definitely are. Again, your standard vector drawing program with your standard vector drawing tools. It's not Illustrator, but depending on your use case, it might be all you need. Next up is everybody's favorite, Blender. 3D rendering program, and also this can be used for video editing too. Again, available on Windows, Mac, and on Linux. You find tons of tutorials for using this program online. It has lots of capabilities. And it has a really steep learning curve too, but again, this is actually one of the engines lots of creators use. Next up, let's talk KDE Live or KDE in Live. This is your standard nonlinear video editing program, and it works like a lot of other ones out there. You can import pictures, clips, audios, videos, chop them, cut them, rearrange them, whatever you need to do. For me, it works fairly well. It may fit your use case, it may not. That's really going to be up to you. And then Audacity is a audio editor. And like, again, you get this a repeating theme here. May meet your needs, they may not. Again, if they meet your needs, it's not going to stop you from switching. If they don't meet your needs, you'll have to look for other programs or applications or not switch. For video players, I'm not sure if MPV is available on Windows, but it's one of my favorites for just a quick play. You drop and play, it's all it does. If you want to get a little more complex, VLC is another one that is available on all platforms. It can do much more things than MPV, but again, depends on your needs. If I'm just watching videos, yeah, MPV. If I want to do a playlist or connect to a universal plug and play, VLC, yeah. And then we have KeyPass, which is actually available on every major platform out there. Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, you name it, it's available. It's a password vault is what it is. It holds your passwords in an encrypted file. You need to type in a password to unencrypt them, but you keep all your password information here. And the same file used on Linux can be used on Windows, same encrypted file, and it'll work with programs there. It'll work with, like, for example, Nextcloud has a KeyPass interpreter that'll be able to read the file. Android has a KeyPass program. Like I say, it works on pretty much every platform, and you've only got one interface, and you can use just one file. If you get it on the platform, it'll manage your passwords for you. It really simplifies things for me, not having a different password manager on Windows and online and on Linux. And Digicam. Digicam, I take a lot of photos, and it allows me to manage my photos. Again, available on other platforms besides Linux. Has a lot of features. Does tags, facial recognition, geo placement, time, anything you may need to do. So yeah, I use this one to manage my pictures. Okay, digital audio workstation. I'm using LMMS, which is not what I would call a sophisticated digital audio working station, but again, meets my needs, and that's the key thing. It does all the functionality I need it to do. And now for a bonus. I spent what must have been 5 days trying to get Fallout 3 to work on Windows 11. A couple days ago, I gave up in frustration and installed Steam on my Linux of my dual boot computer. I downloaded Fallout 3 via Steam and Proton. And you know what? It worked first time. Imagine that. I'm guessing a lot of the bugs and stuff on older programs, since Fallout 3 is a fairly old program, have been worked out, and they may not run on Windows 10 or Windows 11, but apparently a lot of them run fine on Linux. Surprise, surprise. And again, I don't do any really new gaming. I think, well, I'm going to try Fallout 4 on here if that works. That's great. And I'm going to try Mass Effect Legendary on here. If that works, that's going to be great too. That's other reasons to dump Windows because, again, those are the games I play. All right, that was fun. In this video, we've talked about applications, and while the operating system is important, it is much less important to success than the applications one uses and then being able to do the functions one needs. Again, it's not overly difficult to tinker with the graphic user interface and make it behave like other operating systems with a fairly fixed environment. When one is working on something, it is actual application workflow that it will make or break the experience. If one cannot accomplish what one wants, the environment makes absolutely no difference. Hence the focus on applications in this second video. I also cannot stress enough that you might be using different applications than before, and while they may be similar, the functionality is not going to be identical, so it is critical to look at the applications, look at specific functionality that you need, and look at how you can achieve them and how it fits into your workflow. Nothing worse than to make a switch and find out there are things you need to do differently and you can't do them now. The hallmark of a successful operating system switch is to do your homework first and determine if switching is the best option for you. Don't worry so much about us talking heads and do what is right for you. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video or got any benefit at all, please take a moment to give a like. And if you are interested in checking out future upcoming videos, please subscribe. And again, comments are always welcome. Till next time, have a great day.